I think my brother and his wife are trying to scam me and my husband out of our house. Throwaway for obvious reasons. This is going to be super long, but I'm honestly freaking out and need some outside perspective. I, female, 35, and my husband Dan, male, 37, bought our house about 5 years ago after saving for literally a decade. We both worked our asses off for this. I'm a nurse at a community hospital, night shifts a lot of the time, it's exhausting. And Dan runs his own landscaping business that he built from nothing. The house needed a ton of work when we got it, but we've put in thousands of dollars and basically every weekend for years, making it our dream home. Some background on my brother that's important. My younger brother Jacob, male, 33, has always been my parents' favorite kid, despite being super irresponsible his whole life. Growing up, he got away with everything while I was held to this completely different standard. Like when we had our birthdays as teenagers, we're only 11 months apart. My parents got him a car for his 16th birthday, even though he was literally failing half his classes. I got clothes for my birthday that same year despite being on the honor roll. And I'm not talking nice clothes or anything, just basic stuff from the mall. This has been the pattern our whole lives. Jacob screws up, my parents bail him out or make excuses, while I've always had to figure things out myself. Jacob married Caitlin, female, 32, 3 years ago after dating for only 6 months. She supposedly comes from this wealthy Connecticut family, but weirdly cut contact with them right before meeting Jacob. I've always felt something was just off about her. She tells different stories about her background depending on who she's talking to, and she seems to encourage Jacob's worst habits. I've mostly kept these thoughts to myself because Dan always says I'm too hard on Jacob and need to let go of childhood grudges. So about 4 months ago, Jacob called me crying, saying he and Caitlin were being evicted because their landlord was selling the building. They needed somewhere to stay just for a couple months, until they found a new place they could afford. I was hesitant because Jacob has borrowed money before and never paid it back, but Dan immediately offered our spare bedroom. Dan's family moved around a lot when he was a kid due to money problems, so he's really sensitive about housing issues and can't say no to family needing a place. I reluctantly agreed, but set some clear boundaries. They'd pay $400 a month toward utilities, actively look for their own place, and help with household chores. Jacob was super grateful and promised they'd be perfect house guests and it would only be for a short time. The first red flag appeared when they showed up with way more stuff than made sense for a temporary stay. They even brought furniture they insisted on storing in our garage, which meant Dan had to rearrange all his landscaping equipment. It looked like they were moving in permanently, not staying just a couple months. After the first month, Jacob claimed he couldn't pay the $400 because his hours at the retail store where he works got cut. Caitlin mentioned she was between jobs after leaving her previous job because of problems with her boss. She's had like 7 different jobs in the 3 years I've known her, always leaving because of conflicts with management or coworkers. I brought up the money while I was making dinner one night. I asked Jacob about the $400 we agreed on for the month. He looked uncomfortable and said they were short on money. I reminded him about our agreement and how we budget around that contribution. Caitlin jumped in saying we shouldn't be so transactional with family and that family should support each other. Dan suggested they could pay next month when Jacob's hours improved. I felt completely undermined but didn't want to argue in front of them. Jacob promised they'd pay double next month. They didn't. Later that night, I told Dan I was frustrated that he didn't back me up. He accused me of not having compassion for family. I backed down to avoid a fight, but I was still really upset about it. As weeks passed, Jacob and Caitlin completely stopped mentioning apartment hunting. They started talking about our house like they lived here permanently, calling the guest room our room, and even rearranging the kitchen cabinets without asking. They never clean up after themselves. I'll come home from a 12-hour shift and find their dirty dishes everywhere and their stuff all over the living room. When I bring it up, they always have some excuse like, we were just about to clean that, or we didn't realize that bothered you, which is bullshit because we've talked about it a million times. Caitlin has become weirdly attentive to Dan. She's always asking his advice on personal stuff and finding reasons to be alone with him. She touches his arm when talking to him and laughs way too hard at his jokes. It makes me really uncomfortable, but I keep telling myself I'm being paranoid. Yesterday, I came home early from work with a terrible migraine. I was planning to just go straight to bed, but when I quietly came in the front door, I overheard Caitlin and Jacob talking in the kitchen. I heard Caitlin say, "Dan already trusts us. He'll sign if we present it as a formality for the insurance paperwork. Molly is the problem. We need to work on her or find a way around her." I literally froze in the hallway, feeling sick to my stomach. What were they planning that involves Dan signing something? And what do they mean by finding a way around me? I didn't confront them. I quietly went back outside, waited a few minutes, then came in making lots of noise so they'd know I was home. I went straight to bed claiming my migraine was really bad. I haven't told Dan what I heard yet because I wanted to get my thoughts straight first. And honestly, I'm afraid he'll just say I'm overreacting or misheard them. Am I overreacting? Should I confront them or talk to Dan first? Has anyone dealt with something like this before? My grandmother always told me to trust my gut about people, and my gut has been screaming about Caitlin since day one. I know I probably sound paranoid, but something is definitely wrong here. I just don't know what to do next. Edit. Some people are asking why I don't just kick them out. It's not that simple. Dan would need to agree, and he tends to give Jacob endless chances. Also, legally they might have tenant rights by now, even without a formal lease. Edit 2. To those asking about their behavior with apartment hunting, yes, I've repeatedly asked about it, and they always have excuses. The market is too expensive right now. Or, we're saving for a better place. Or, we applied for something but haven't heard back. When I suggested cheaper apartments in the next town over, Caitlin literally wrinkled her nose and said, "We're looking for something more, suitable for our lifestyle." What lifestyle? You don't have jobs. Edit 3. I know I sound paranoid about Caitlin's attention toward Dan, but trust me, it goes beyond normal friendliness. Like yesterday, she literally sat next to him on the couch when there were other seats available and kept accidentally brushing against him. Edit 4. Thanks for all the advice so far. Someone asked about mail. Yes, they've been getting all their mail delivered to our address, which I thought was just temporary, but now I realize they probably never intended to move out. I'm going to try to talk to Dan tonight and show him this post so he can see I'm not crazy for being concerned. Now for the first update. First, thank you all so much for the support on my last post. Things have gotten so much worse, and I've been absolutely losing my mind these past couple weeks. So after I overheard Caitlin talking about getting Dan to sign something and finding a way around me, I didn't confront them right away. I know some of you said I should have immediately called them out, but honestly, I was freaking terrified and wanted to get more information first. Like I know my brother, he's always been able to talk his way out of anything. He could literally get caught red-handed and somehow twist it around until you're apologizing to him. This reminded me so much of when we were teenagers, and he stole $340 from my savings jar that I'd been collecting for months from my babysitting jobs to buy a new bike. He spent it all on video games, and then when I confronted him, he somehow convinced my parents that I had given him permission to borrow it. They believed him. And then my dad lectured me about being more generous with my brother and how family helps family. I never got that money back, by the way. Anyway, after overhearing that conversation, I started paying way more attention to everything. I noticed Caitlin had been volunteering to bring in the mail every day, which seemed weird, but I was just happy someone was doing a chore, to be honest. So I started making sure I got home in time to check it myself. What I found really freaked me out. They've changed their address on everything to our house. Credit card statements, medical bills, magazine subscriptions, everything. It wasn't just temporary mail forwarding. They were setting up permanent residence without ever discussing it with us. But what really freaked me out was finding a letter addressed to Jacob from some law firm that specializes in real estate transfers. I know snooping is wrong or whatever, but at that point I was like, screw it. I took a rare day off work when everyone was out. Dan was at a big landscaping job, Jacob was at his retail job, and Caitlin was supposedly at a job interview that I'm 99% sure wasn't real. I searched their room, and oh my frickin' god, you guys. In their closet, I found actual paperwork for transferring property ownership that would add both Jacob and Caitlin as co-owners of our house with right of survivorship. And the absolute worst part, I found a notebook where Caitlin had been practicing Dan's signature over and over. There were literally pages of attempts getting closer and closer to his actual signature. I almost threw up when I saw that. I decided to dig deeper before confronting anyone. I called their previous landlord pretending to be doing a reference check. I know, probably not ethical, but I was desperate. Turns out they weren't evicted because the building was being sold. They just stopped paying rent for 3 months and left when the landlord started legal proceedings. They literally created this whole sob story about being suddenly homeless when they knew for months they were going to need a new place. Then I called my cousin Emma, who mentioned last Christmas that Jacob and Caitlin had been staying with our grandmother for a while before she passed. Apparently, they convinced Grandma to add them to her bank account for emergencies and then withdrew $20,000 for investments that never materialized. The family kept it quiet because Grandma was embarrassed about being taken advantage of. I had no idea about any of this. When Dan got home that night, I sat him down and showed him everything. He was like, there must be some explanation at first, and suggested maybe Jacob didn't know what Caitlin was doing. I showed him the notebook with the signature practice, and he went completely pale. Dan finally realized this was forgery. I told him about the landlord and what happened with Grandma. He kept saying he couldn't believe Jacob would do this to us. I had to remind him that even if it was all Caitlin's idea, which I doubt, Jacob is still 100% responsible. They're married. They're in this together. Dan finally agreed we needed to confront them and ask them to leave. That night, when they got home, we sat them down in the living room. I was literally shaking. I was so angry. We showed them what we found, and oh my freaking God, the excuses. Jacob denied everything at first, then claimed they were just exploring options to contribute to the household. Caitlin started crying. Fake tears. I'm a nurse. I know what real crying looks like. Saying they only wanted family stability without their names on the property. When we told them they needed to leave, Jacob completely lost it. He started shouting about how I owe him because our parents always favored me and gave me opportunities he never got. What opportunities? I worked my ass off for everything I have while he got bailed out constantly. Then Caitlin told us she's pregnant and claimed we were making a family with a baby homeless. I 100% don't believe she's actually pregnant. She's been drinking wine every night and hasn't had any symptoms at all. And when I asked about her due date or doctor appointments, she got super vague. We told them they had 30 days to find a new place. And that's when they started talking about tenant rights and how we can't just kick them out without going through proper legal channels. Dan and I were completely surprised. We never wanted to be landlords to my scammer brother. Since then, our house has become terrible. They're doing everything possible to make our lives hard, using all the hot water before we get up, making tons of noise when I'm trying to sleep before night shifts, accidentally breaking my things. Caitlin tried to get Dan to sign the transfer documents by disguising them as insurance paperwork when I was working a night shift. Luckily, Dan read everything carefully after our conversation. The worst was when I found our wedding album completely soaked with water. Caitlin claimed she spilled a drink, but the album was on a high shelf in our bedroom closet. How do you accidentally spill something there? We talked to a lawyer who confirmed that because they've been here more than 30 days, we have to go through formal eviction proceedings, which could take months. We've started locking our bedroom door at night and bought a safe for important documents. And now they're spreading lies to our entire family. My mom called me yesterday saying she wants to understand both sides because Jacob told her we had promised to sell them half the house and are now backing out. My dad actually suggested we should consider the arrangement because they need it more with a baby on the way. I can't even believe this is happening. We served them with formal eviction papers yesterday. Dan had to physically hand them to Jacob while I stood nearby recording everything on my phone. Lawyer's suggestion. Jacob crumpled them up and threw them at Dan's face. Caitlin was in the background, fake sobbing about the baby. I'm honestly terrified about what they might do next. Dan and I are barely sleeping. We're both constantly on edge, checking that nothing's been tampered with. This is absolutely destroying me. Now for the second update. Hey everyone. First, I wanted to say thank you so much for all the advice and support on my previous posts. The kind words and encouragement have literally been the only thing keeping me sane these past few weeks. So the eviction process has been going through the courts for the past few weeks. Legal stuff moves so slow. And living with Jacob and Caitlin has been absolute hell. We've all been avoiding each other as much as possible. But we still have to share common spaces, and every interaction is just awful. They basically stopped even pretending to be civil. At first it was passive-aggressive stuff, like using all the hot water before my morning shower, or accidentally turning off the alarm I set for night shifts. But then it escalated to straight-up hostility. Caitlin would blast music when I was trying to sleep before work. Jacob would leave disgusting messes in the kitchen right after I cleaned. They'd have loud fights at 2 a.m. that I'm pretty sure were just for show to disturb us. I've been feeling terrible. I'm not sleeping, like, at all. Every little noise in the house makes me jump because I'm convinced they're trying to forge more documents or steal something. I started hiding my laptop and important papers in my car trunk because I don't trust leaving anything valuable at home. Dan and I bought this little safe for our documents, but honestly, I wasn't even sure that was enough protection. The stress has been affecting my work too. I've made small mistakes at the hospital that I never would have made before. Nothing dangerous, thank God, but little things like forgetting to document something or mixing up patient names when talking to a colleague. Last week, I was setting up an IV and my hands were shaking so bad that the charge nurse noticed and asked if I was feeling all right. That was honestly really embarrassing. I can handle emergency situations at work, but can't deal with my brother trying to steal my house. One of the senior nurses, Brenda, pulled me aside after shift and asked if everything was okay at home, and I just burst into tears right there in the break room. So humiliating. I tried explaining what was happening, but I could tell she thought I was exaggerating. It sounds crazy when you say it out loud that my own brother was practicing my husband's signature to steal our house. The whole situation has been really hard on my marriage too. Don't get me wrong, Dan has been mostly supportive since we found the forged signature practice, but he still occasionally makes comments that drive me crazy. Like last week, he suggested we all sit down for dinner together to clear the air, and I was like, "Are you serious? They tried to steal our house and forge your signature, and you want to have a nice family dinner?" Sometimes I feel like he still doesn't fully grasp how calculated and deliberate their actions were. Anyways, about 3 weeks into the eviction process, something weird happened. Jacob and Caitlin suddenly became nice. They started keeping to themselves, cleaned up after themselves, and were almost polite. They'd say good morning or even ask how our day was. It was bizarre. Dan thought they'd realized they'd gone too far. He thought they were preparing to leave on good terms. But something about it felt off to me. It reminded me of when we were kids and Jacob would suddenly become super well-behaved right before doing something really bad. Like when he was 14 and suddenly started doing chores and being extra nice to my parents for a week, right before they discovered he'd stolen Dad's car for a joyride and crashed it into a mailbox. Turns out my instincts were right. God, I wish they weren't. So last Wednesday, Dan and I both got home from work around the same time, which never happens. He usually gets home way before me. The house was weirdly quiet. No Jacob, no Caitlin. At first, we thought maybe they'd just gone out, but then we noticed some of their stuff was missing from the living room. We went to check their bedroom and they were gone, like moved out completely. But they didn't just take their own stuff. Those absolute assholes took Dan's professional landscaping tools, worth over $1,500, my grandmother's jewelry box with all the pieces she left me when she died, not even that valuable money-wise, but impossible to replace, our PS5 and all the games, both our tablets, weirdly, all the framed family photos that had Jacob in them, and they completely trashed the guest room. There were stains all over the carpet. Some looked deliberately made with like coffee or wine, holes punched in the walls, and the beautiful built-in bookshelf that Dan spent months making by hand had deep gouges in it, like someone took a knife to it. We were in complete shock. Dan kept trying to call Jacob, but he wouldn't answer. I found the empty space in my jewelry box where my grandma's things were and just broke down crying on the floor. Dan sat with me and kept saying we'd get through this, but I could tell he was barely holding it together too. We had this whole debate about whether to call the police. Dan was still hesitant because he was worried about getting Jacob in real trouble. I had to explain that this wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was theft and vandalism. We finally compromised by calling the non-emergency line. An officer came and took our statements and pictures of the damage. He helped us file a report for the stolen items. That's when Dan finally admitted I was right all along about Jacob and Caitlin's intentions. I was too exhausted and sad to even say, "I told you so." The next day it got even worse. My mom called screaming at me. Jacob and Caitlin had told my parents some completely made-up story about how Dan and I had promised to sell them half the house, that they had invested $10,000 in home improvements. What improvements? And that I got jealous and kicked them out because of childhood resentments. And my parents believed them, without even calling to hear our side first. My mom said I was wrong for doing this to my brother and that our house was too big for just us anyway. When I tried to explain about the forged signatures and stolen items, my dad got on the phone and said Jacob was just using creative problem solving and that I was being materialistic about the stolen items. Materialistic. It's literal theft. They even suggested that Dan and I should reconsider letting Jacob and Caitlin be co-owners since they need it more with a baby on the way. I was literally speechless. But wait, it gets even worse. 2 days later, we got a credit card statement in the mail for accounts we never opened. These psychopaths had somehow opened 2 credit cards in Dan's name and charged over $7,000. I actually threw up when I saw the statement. Dan went from being upset to absolutely furious. Like, I've never seen him that angry in all the years we've been together. We immediately filed another police report specifically for identity theft, called all 3 credit bureaus to put fraud alerts on our accounts, disputed all the charges, froze our credit so no one could open anything else. I called my parents to tell them about the credit card fraud, thinking surely this would convince them. Nope. My mom accused me of being vindictive and trying to get Jacob arrested. Dan told my parents exactly what Jacob and Caitlin did, and my dad suggested we could work out a payment plan instead of involving police. Dan actually hung up on them. He was so mad. I cried for hours after that call. It feels like I've lost my entire family, not just Jacob, but my parents too. Dan said we're each other's family now, which was sweet, but honestly just made me cry harder. Our extended family has basically split into Team Jacob and Team Molly. Most of my cousins and my dad's sister believe us, but my mom's side of the family is all supporting Jacob. The weirdest thing is that my Aunt Martha called me out of the blue to say that Jacob and Caitlin had tried to pull something similar with her retirement savings last year, but she was too embarrassed to tell anyone. If she had spoken up sooner, maybe none of this would have happened to us. I've made the decision to go low contact with my parents while they're still enabling Jacob. It's been about 3 months since everything went down, and I heard through my cousin that Jacob and Caitlin tried to pull a similar scam on my Uncle Bill, but thankfully the family had been warned because of what happened with us. My dad still calls occasionally to pressure me to make up with Jacob. Absolutely not happening, but interestingly, my mom has started to see the light a little bit. Jacob recently asked them for a small loan of $20,000 to start a business, and even my mom thought that sounded suspicious. The police haven't been able to track Jacob and Caitlin down yet. They're supposedly staying with friends, but keep moving around. The credit card company is investigating the fraud, but said it could take months to resolve everything. I'm still struggling with all of this. Some days I'm just so angry I can barely function. Other days I'm just sad about losing my brother and parents. Dan and I are in therapy trying to process everything and rebuild our sense of security. I guess the good news is that they're finally out of our house. We've changed all the locks, installed security cameras, and are slowly repairing the damage to the guest room. Dan rebuilt the bookshelf and made it even better than before. I know I'll probably never see my grandmother's jewelry again, and that breaks my heart. But at least now we know who Jacob and Caitlin really are, and they can never take advantage of us again. Thanks for listening to this crazy update. I'm still processing everything and trying to heal. Edit: for those asking about legal consequences, yes, we're still pursuing charges for the theft and identity fraud. Our lawyer says there's a good chance Jacob and Caitlin will face criminal charges, especially for the credit card fraud, since that's easier to prove. The process is just really slow. Edit 2. A lot of you are asking if I think Jacob was always like this or if Caitlin influenced him. Honestly, Jacob has always been selfish and irresponsible, but never this calculated and cruel. I do think Caitlin brought out the worst in him, but he's a grown man making his own choices. They deserve each other, to be honest.